Long before the X-Files, before Uri Geller had even bent a spoon or aliens had landed on Roswell, Britain had its own investigator of the supernatural. He was a self-appointed professor of the paranormal, making a handsome living out of the weird and the bizarre. His controversial claims entranced the public, angered the skeptics, and turned him from a non-entity into an international celebrity. His name was Harry Price. Yes, Harry Price. And this is his story. And you are going to love it.
Harry Price was the most famous psychic investigator of the 1930s. This was an era when stories of ghosts and psychics were making headlines. There was the Devil Girl of Romania, Borley Rectory, the most famous haunted house in England, and of course Jeff the Talking Mongoose.
I could kill you, you know? Yeah, kill you, right where you're at.
Harry Price is, in many ways, my hero, because he was out there doing the really fascinating work, making psychical research enormously colourful, working with some of the world's greatest mediums, some of the world's greatest psychics, really trying to figure out what was going on.
Harry Price had, of course, a huge interest in the paranormal. He was a member of the Society of Psychical Research, wasn't too impressed with the progress they were making, so in 1926, he opened his own laboratory.
If a man comes to us and says that he can produce abnormal phenomena, then we test him by instrumental means.
With his national laboratory, Price wanted to find out what was going on. There you had mediums and psychics claiming these amazing abilities, and he wanted to find the answers. Was it really possible to contact the dead?
Psychical research is a science and is rapidly becoming an exact science. Its object is to ascertain by exact experimental methods how far the alleged phenomena of the seance room can be brought into line with normality.
Harry Price's career as a ghost hunter began in the 1920s when mysteries like telepathy, hauntings, and spirit seances were hardly ever out of the headlines. Spiritualism was enjoying a revival in the aftermath of World War I and a million dead soldiers. Mediums acted as intermediaries between this life and the next. The debate raged. Was it really possible to talk to the dead? And more importantly, would the dead answer back? Harry Price, who was something of an amateur scientist, decided there was only one way to find out. He would put the mediums to the test.
The fundamental trick of a medium is to convince the audience that you need to have dim lights or the lights off in order to attract the spirits. Of course, once you switch off the lights, do anything you want, really.
Your imagination takes flight in the dark. You know, I've sort of done this myself with a group of people. You become very aware that even a tiny creak or anything from the room gets interpreted and exaggerated, and you very easily believe that supernatural events are taking place.
They would generally be sat down in a seance situation and be tied down. The reason they had to be tied down is because things were being thrown around the rooms and objects were being moved, and they wanted to prove the fact that they weren't doing it. Well, the obvious thing is that they were escapologists, that they could escape from their bonds and they were able to do that type of thing.
Harry designed all kinds of ingenious equipment to help in his quest for truth, and he designed carefully controlled situations in which to monitor the mediums. All these controls had one aim: to prevent fraud. Rudi Schneider, renowned for his apparent psychic powers, was born in the Austrian town of Braunau in 1908. Many leading scientists from around Europe attended his seances. They were all impressed with the strange phenomena observed.
Rudi has never been caught in fraud. During the entire history of psychical research, there were only 2 mediums who have never been caught, actually caught. That was D.D. Hume in the 19th century, Rudi Schneider in the 20th century.
Harry organised Rudy to London in 1929 to be stringently tested at his National Laboratory for Psychical Research.
Most mediums of the time really didn't like the idea of taking part in research where they would actually be controlled and there would be an attempt to eliminate normal explanations. But that wasn't the case with Rudy. He was fine about the idea of Price imposing whatever controls he wanted to find out what was really going on.
So when Price tested Rudi Schneider, he had a great way of telling whether the medium or any of the sitters that could also be stooges or in on it were breaking away from the circle. So obviously everybody has to hold hands. If you break away, you can move things in the dark. Now the way that he would do it was to get everyone to wear special gloves and pass an electric current around the circle. Then if anybody was cheating and breaking away from the circle, a bulb would light up in the dark, which was fantastic.
Mrs. Pearson, could you put your glove on properly, please? Thank you.
The seances of Rudi Schneider proved sensational.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Despite the conditions laid down by Harry Price, tables shook, bells rang, and objects floated into the air.
Hold tight.
Was this absolute proof of the spirit world?
As we look back now, we can see that Harry Price's work with Rudi Schneider was really a conversion experience for him. There was Harry Price, the magician, a member of the Magic Circle, a man who knew how to eliminate fraud. And he tried his best with Schneider. He tried everything he could think of to try and stop the man cheating. But still the phenomena occurred. And because of that, he was converted. He said, this is the genuine thing. People can really produce paranormal phenomena.
Harry's investigation turned Rudy into a psychic superstar, a press sensation. Everyone was talking about them. Psychics sought Harry out. They wanted the Harry Price seal of approval.
There were several great ages for mediumship and interest in spiritualism. And curiously, they always happen after major wars. The First World War was catastrophic for many families. Also, for the first time, their sons, their brothers were just disappearing. They were just getting a note in the post saying, your son has died and been buried. Now, there was no mourning process. Grieving was cut short. There was so much suffering, but it had to come out, and it came out with an obsessive interest in spiritualism and mediumship. And this was ripe for exploitation, which is certainly what happened.
In 1931, the most famous British medium was Helen Duncan, and she made a considerable living from her seances. Many of her followers believed her to be genuinely psychic. She also had a manifestation in her repertoire that singled her out from other mediums. She could produce ectoplasm. As you'll see.
The idea of producing ectoplasm was a very dramatic experiment. This is ectoplasm. This is the stuff ghosts are made of.
Imagine you're sitting there and there's your dad in front of you. You can touch his hand, you can talk to him, he can talk to you. That is really amazing, very amazing. That's the sort of thing Helen Duncan used to do, and many, many people were touched by her mediumship.
Helen Duncan was born in Perthshire, Scotland in 1898. She was a working-class woman who became a spiritual medium and made money from her seances, reuniting dead spirits with loved ones.
Harry was desperate to find his own materialization medium, and he did find someone in the form of Helen Duncan.
Harry Price did investigate Helen Duncan, who was a well-known medium of her time, who produced not only mental effects, that is to say messages from spirits, so-called clairvoyance, and physical effects in dark seances. She did both.
Harry didn't believe that Helen Duncan was a genuine medium.
Before the seances with Harry Price, Helen Duncan was always searched. So it was something of a mystery how she could produce this drapery. But there were theories as to how she concealed it, but I think they're too disgusting to discuss in detail.
Well, one thing about Helen Duncan's ectoplasm was that it would always be accompanied by a very strange odour, and this was something that led Harry Price to think that she was regurgitating the cloth.
I believe that she was a genuine medium. That's how she started off, a genuine medium. As time went on, because of the pressure, because of the expectation, she did give in to the temptation and the expectation by using cloth, muslin and other devices.
I think if you look very carefully at those photographs from Helen Duncan's seances, the manifestations, the ghosts, appear to be a little less than entirely convincing. I think this is probably something to do with the flash photography. Maybe in the dark they were a little more convincing. They look a little bit like blow-up dolls covered in cloth. You know, you've got to remember that people were set up to expect something supernatural, and they would latch onto these vague images in the dark as their loved ones, you know, which is not particularly flattering for those loved ones. But nonetheless, people would see them as absolutely what they weren't.
The photographs that Harry Price took seemed to be very clearly photographs of ordinary material, which you could see was woven. And you could see the folds and the hem, things like that.
So what he suggested was they X-ray Helen Duncan. At that point, she becomes furious. She bursts out of the lab, runs onto the street. They go out, they bring her back into the lab, they X-ray her, there's nothing to be found. And so Price assumes that somehow she's got rid of the cheesecloth. Harry Price's suspicions about Helen Duncan were later supported because in 1944 she was arrested during a séance and charged with being a fraudulent medium. Now there's still a huge amount of debate about the trial and the evidence, but the bottom line was she was found guilty and sentenced to 9 months.
When we return, I'll take you to England's most haunted house and to meet the Devil Girl from Romania. India has always been a great source of mystery, and in the 1930s many Indian magicians came over to the West to demonstrate their powers. They went into trances, buried themselves alive. They appeared impervious to pain, and one of them even claimed to have X-ray eyes.
An Indian, Cuda Books, claims to have X-ray eyes, and we bring you exclusive pictures of a searching test made before a committee of doctors and newspapermen. The eyes of the seer, or rather the can't-seer, are covered with lumps of dough, cotton wool and surgical bandage. And to make sure that whatever light remains won't be too strong on Cuda Books' eyes, a couple of towels are tied round his head.
Harry was an amateur magician, he was a member of the Magic Circle, and it was his magic knowledge that he would use when sorting out the psychic phenomena from the frauds.
Harry Price, I think, knew that Cuda Bux was a magician. I mean, certainly Harry Price would have had the knowledge to understand the methods that Cuda Bux was employing.
A sentence is written on a blackboard, and to find out whether Cuda's a fakir or a faker, he's asked to copy it.
Cuda Bux used to describe his ability as basically a heightened sense of concentration.
There are two men on the other side of the room. One has a cigarette. Will you light it?
he was able to somehow pick up the vibrations of certain things without apparently seeing them.
And Cuda does it.
To the general public, Cuda Bux appeared to have amazing abilities. He was the man with the X-ray eyes. But Harry Price was a magician, and he knew that what he was looking at here was a magic trick. But in conversations with Cuda Bux, something else emerged. Cuda Bux claimed to be able to do something that Harry Price had been curious about for many, many years. He claimed to be able to walk on fire.
If any of you would like to try this in your own back garden, all you have to do is to repeat this charm.
The sentence is Kulla naro kuni bagdan wa salaman ala Ibrahim.
The result should be this. But this was the result when these poor fellows forgot the magic words.
When he investigated firewalking, he really set a precedent as to how this could be done, and he eliminated a lot of possible trickery as well.
Price was the first person to inject some science into the situation. He built the bed, he measured the temperatures, he checked Cuda Bux's feet for chemicals, and yes indeed, Cuda Bux could do this. So we know there's a genuine phenomenon. But Price was the first person to say this is genuine and you can actually do some scientific research here.
The X-ray vision might be a trick, but the firewalking wasn't. Now nowadays, we're so used to seeing firewalking with these business conference and team buildership weekends that we're sort of very used to it, and we realise there's nothing to it, but Price was the first person to realise that.
Cuda Bux went on to appear in the 1940 British film They Came by Night. Sadly, he went blind and died in 1981. In 1927, a mysterious parcel was delivered anonymously to Harry Price's office, and with it, a letter saying that the enclosed box once belonged to the 19th century prophetess Joanna Southcott. The box, it said, contained a message of great importance, a revelation that would touch not only the future of Britain, but that of the entire world. There was, however, a catch. It could only be opened in the presence of 24 bishops.
Joanna Southcott was brought up in Gittisham, which was an area which was full of superstition.
At the age of 42, she had a profound religious experience that led her to believe that she was chosen by God for some special mission. In 1814, now aged 64 and still a virgin, she gave out the news that she was pregnant and would give birth to the new Messiah. She became national news, and the country held its breath, waiting for this delivery, but she died at the end of 1814 without giving birth to any physical child, but her followers believed that a spiritual child had been born. She left behind a box containing her sealed prophecies.
The prophecies were also supposed to tell the followers, when the Day of Judgment came, what they had to do in order to save themselves. The world is going to be ruled for 1,000 years, according to Joanna Southcott, by Joanna and her son, her holy son that she was supposed to have had, Shiloh. And so they're going to come back, probably next year, and conduct the world for the next 1,000 years.
Joanna's work, her mission, had taken place after the French Revolution, when values and faith were shaken and people were looking for reassurance. And a similar situation prevailed after the First World War. And societies grew up who wanted to put pressure on the bishops of the Church of England to open Joanna Southcott's box. And they started an enormous poster campaign asking the bishops to open the box. What Harry Price decided to do with the box was to have a great public opening, so he ostentatiously sent invitations to the 2 archbishops and 80 bishops to come along.
But of course the bishops weren't prepared to go and spend 7 days and 7 nights examining the prophecies. And the other stipulation was that they should be attended by 24 virgins. Obviously the Church of England, that's why they've never took up the invitation, because they know that it's a bit ridiculous.
Harry opened the box anyway in front of just one bishop, but press from around the world.
What he did was he picked out each item and handed it to the bishop, who was quite happy to hold it up and wave it around so that everybody could see what was inside it.
This box was opened at the Church House, Westminster, in 1927, and a wave of excitement passed through the audience as I cut the steel bag. The box contained the most extraordinary collection of objects.
They found, among other things, a pistol, a lacy nightcap.
Very curious.
A dice box.
But what Joanna wanted with a dice box, I can't say.
A novel with the racy title of The Surprise of Love, or An Adventure in Greenwich Park.
Well, I have shown you the very curious contents of that box, but I'm afraid that there was nothing in it which Joanna Selcott said would save the nation in a time of emergency.
The box was of the right period, and it even had a little inlaid, her initials inlaid on the lid. But he knew that it wasn't the box because he was very clever. Before he opened it up, he'd actually x-rayed it, and he knew what was inside. He knew that it was full of rubbish, trinkets. He also knew that it was a jolly good way of publicising his laboratory of psychical research.
Great Britain is noted for its ghosts. Every castle has its phantom, every village has its headless horseman, every forest has its banshee, and you're never far from a haunted pub. But it was Harry Price who immortalized Borley Rectory as the most haunted house in England. Borley Rectory had a history of a phantom nun who used to wander through the garden.
I've seen the nun 3 times now.
Once nun?
Yes. Once on the Nun's Walk and twice in this churchyard.
Harry Price's first visit was in June 1929. He was tipped off about the matter by the editor of the Daily Mirror.
He thought, well, maybe there's a major news story here.
I just finished watering the chickens and I came into the house and went upstairs to my room. And I leaned out of the window, as I often do at nights, and I was there for about 10 minutes and I noticed a nun glided across.
Harry Price turned up at Borley Rectory and immediately all sorts of strange things started happening. Vases flying about, stones being thrown, bricks falling through greenhouse roofs. Previously there had been no objective phenomena at all. The only incidents had been hallucinations. Phantom coaches had been seen and heard, or phantom nuns had been seen in the garden, but nothing like stones or bell ringings, and a whole week of glorious news stories went out from the Daily Mirror, and it was the newspaper's sensation.
In 1937, nearly 10 years after his first visit, Harry Price decided that Borley's time had come. He placed an advertisement in the Times newspaper asking for volunteers to investigate the rectory, and this is what it said. Haunted house. Responsible persons of leisure and intelligence, intrepid, critical and unbiased, are invited to join a rota of observers in a year's night and day investigation of an alleged haunted house in the home counties. Who could resist that?
He just said, would you like to be a psychic investigator? I'll train you up, you do this, and then I'll print the results. Now, if you were to look at that from a publicity stunt, it's phenomenal, because he hasn't got any cynics, he hasn't got any scientists or credited psychic investigators. He's just got normal members of the public and train them up to be psychic investigators.
The investigators traced around objects with chalk to see if anything would move overnight.
So with Borley Rectory, Price had, over the course of a year, had various student investigators spend the time in this, the most haunted place in England, and they were given notebooks there to write down things that happened to them, and something called the Blue Book, which contained a list of rules and things that they had to do and follow. But basically there was so much suggestion involved of what they might expect to happen that clearly, as we might imagine, they were interpreting anything as supernatural events, and their imagination was taking flight.
Certain premises, like you have to stay in a room on your own in the dark for 2 hours a day. Now obviously, if anyone does that, your mind will begin to play tricks on you, and not surprisingly there were reports of rapping noises, things disappearing, things smashing, and he printed all of these findings in a book, which became a best-selling book.
Well, obviously it caught the public interest. It was well presented. Price was a journalist as well as a psychical researcher. He knew how to present his material.
But the skeptics as such slammed the book. They said it was a setup.
Nearly 10 years after Harry Price's death, the Society for Psychical Research issued a damning report on the Borley Rectory investigation. It suggested that Harry Price was more than just careless in his research. It portrayed him as a publicity hound, given to wild exaggeration. Harry Price, given to wild exaggeration? Is that possible?
It was even suggested that he might have produced some of the effects himself, fraudulently. That was said in the case of Borley Rectory, and a brick which was photographed, I believe, a flying brick. But I don't think that it was ever actually established that he did it, but it was a very suspicious event.
A year after Harry's investigations, Borley Rectory burnt down mysteriously.
Of course, what comes out of it is the absolute perfect ghost story, because you've got a team of investigators spending time in a haunted house, weird things happen, and at the end it burns down. I mean, it is the classic blueprint for any Hollywood horror film. It's been used many, many times since.
Several years later, the rectory ruins were excavated, and an interesting discovery was made.
Excuse me, Mr. Paul. What are you doing down here? Well, we're excavating the cellar of the rectory.
Then came the bones. Part of the remains was the left jawbone. There were some teeth in position. Harry Price implied that these were the bones of the nun. My own view is that there's the need to be more careful.
Was this just another of Harry's publicity stunts? Or was Borley Rectory really one of Britain's most haunted houses? We may never know the truth. Most psychic researchers prefer to avoid the press, especially when conducting their investigations. But Harry Price was different. He regularly invited journalists to his research lab to meet psychics and sit in on seances. It made good copy, he said, and he was right, especially when it came to the story of a 14-year-old peasant girl who seemed to possess the power of mind over matter. Her name was Eleonora Zugan, but the press preferred to call her the Romanian Devil Girl.
Elena Zugan was a young Romanian girl who'd been adopted by one of Europe's leading psychical researchers, the Countess Wasilko. And it was the Countess that brought Zugan to London to be investigated by Price.
Thank you, Eleanor. And what about the ring? Miss Kay has lost her ring. Do you have it? Thank you, Eleanor.
Harry Price investigated the poltergeist activity surrounding Eleanor. He would, for example, put coins around the room and mark them. And whilst they were in the middle of the room, suddenly you might hear a clink. And a coin would materialize as if it had been thrown from the other side of the room. And when examined, it would be one of the coins that was on the outside of the room, and it would be one of the marked coins.
It actually started when she found some sweets or something or other, and her grandmother admonished her for this.
She said, now you have eaten the candy, so you have swallowed the devil now, and he will not leave you, and he's going to possess you and stuff like that.
And straight after, I understand from the story, that the activity started to manifest itself.
The main phenomenon of the Devil Girl was poltergeist activity, really. Objects moving, flying around the room, but also some markings appearing on her body. Some case studies say stigmata, but it was more like bite marks appearing actually on her skin.
The dermal phenomena are broken down into three categories. It's the scratches, the bites, and the spitting. All of them attributed by the girl, by that very superstitious girl, to the Dracu. It was more or less a Dracu complex, a devil's complex that was implanted into her by the curse of the grandmother. She would give a loud like "ow" and make a reaction like that, and then tell the devil has scratched me here, or the devil has bitten me here, something like that.
Well, thank you, Countess, for bringing that around. I think it's been very successful. Sales, hasn't it? I mean, you've produced two rings. The ring. There, my dear. Stop now. Yes. There we are. That's it.
Harry Price was able to see such phenomena occurring right under his eyes.
With the onset of puberty, Eleonora Zugan's psychic powers waned. The bites and the scratches stopped, and the mystery of the Devil Girl remains unsolved. How very sad. How very, very sad. In 1932, 42 photographers and 73 journalists followed Harry Price to the Harz Mountains in Germany. He promised to show them a miracle. He would turn a goat into a prince.
Even Harry himself thought that the Brocken experiment was pretty much just a fun publicity stunt to promote his laboratory of psychical research. And what happened, he received an anonymous package which contained an ancient German spell that had been translated into English. And this spell was designed to turn a goat into a man.
The Brocken experiment was not one of his big points. It was one of the daftest things he ever did, and I think this stemmed from the love of publicity.
He was indeed a very efficient publicist of anything that he did, and also he was prepared to rush off and investigate anything, however fantastic and peculiar, so long as it produced some headlines.
He did a huge sort of Hammer House of Horror style magic ritual with a goat and a virginal girl.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And cast a spell, nothing happened.
After the first failed attempt of turning the goat into the man. They ended up bringing in a German conjurer who managed to pull it off with the help of a bit of camera work from the newsreel people.
The first experiment having failed, a German conjurer tries his magic formula.
Abra, Kadabra, Ziege an der Wand, mache jetzt mir keine Chance.
But the point is, Price had worked the media up into a frenzy over this. It was a massive and bizarre and odd publicity stunt. I mean, certainly the, you know, Blaine up in his box of the, or dare I even say the Russian roulette of the 1930s. A real testimony to his publicity skills, I think.
Of all the cases that Harry Price investigated, this is the strangest. It took place on the Isle of Man at Dawlish Cashen and involved a strange character who liked to be known as Jeff. You remember Jeff? Harry called the story The Haunting of Cashen's Gap, but people all over the world knew it by the simpler name, The Adventures of Jeff, the Talking Mongoose.
Dawlish Cashen itself is the most remote farmhouse that you can possibly imagine. It's a 40-minute walk from the nearest metalled road. You can't get a horse and a cart there at all. So there was this very isolated farmhouse with a very isolated little family in it and a very isolated little mongoose who lived behind the skirting boards. Irving heard scratchings, which he assumed were mice or longtails, as the Manx would call rats.
Bloody rats.
Bloody rats.
And when he shouted at it, a little voice would shout back using the same words.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Where are you?
Where are you?
What is your name?
Jeff.
Price came to the island in 1935 and he brought with him a colleague, a fellow called R.S. Lambert.
This way, gentlemen. This is where Jeff first spoke to me. Hello? Hello? Hello, Jeff? Jeff, this is Mr. Price, the gentleman I spoke to you about.
Let me. Jeff, this is Mr. Price. Could you show yourself to me?
Of course, it is possible. He may not be here right now. He likes to travel about the island, you know.
And how does he travel around the island?
He takes the bus.
Jeff was an extraordinary animal because he could travel and would travel the length and breadth of the island. And he would come back and tell the Irvings of what he had seen and of conversations he had overheard. And when the Irvings checked up on these subsequently, they found out they were quite often correct. So Jeff would travel the island. He claimed to travel riding underneath buses, which didn't go down very well with the bus drivers or the staff at Peel Bus Depot. and they decided to get at Jeff by fitting an electrified plate underneath one of the buses. And Irving heard about this and warned Jeff, and Jeff said, "Oh yes, I know all about that. It's underneath bus number 81.
Jeff, the talking mongoose, could be a very moody fellow. Sometimes he'd disappear for weeks on end, and when he returned, he often proved to be a most unwelcome guest.
I heard you talking about me to Mr. Price. I could kill you, you know. Yes, kill you. Right where you lay.
Jeff stayed at the Irving house for some years, but in all that time only provided 3 pieces of evidence for his existence. A footprint, supposedly left by the creature, a hair from its back, and a photo taken by Mr. Irving's daughter. I see no mongoose. Do you?
When Price and Lambert got back to England, they co-authored a book, which is now very collectible, and it's called The Haunting of Cashan's Gap.
In 1947, it was reported from the Isle of Man that a farmer had shot and killed a very strange-looking creature. It was, they said, a mongoose. I wonder, was it Jeff?
Harry Price did produce the facts, but because he was such an extrovert, he upset quite a lot of people.
Harry Price is the most sensational ghost hunter of all time. He's kind of like the first Fox Mulder psychic investigator, but he was known for his relentless publicity as well. You know, whenever people do extreme publicity stunts, there's always that double-edged sword, losing credibility versus, you know, mass appeal or mass popularity.
The scope of Harry Price's work is incredible. He met the greatest psychics of his day and tested those who were willing. He had no hesitation in exposing those he found to be frauds, while lavishing equal praise on those he thought genuine. But how do you assess the work of a man who wrote so enthusiastically about every supernatural event he came in contact with? Whether it be a haunted house, a telekinetic girl, or even a talking mongoose called Jeff.
When I look back at Price's career, I have very mixed feelings about it. At one level, he was absolutely brilliant, a genius in getting the public involved in psychical research, and he carried out many of the most important investigations of his day. But at another level, you really don't quite know what he actually believed when he said something was genuine. Did he think that, or was that another publicity stunt? So it's very difficult to separate Harry Price the showman from Harry Price the scientist. Saying that, I still think it's a fantastic career, a colourful career, something which really took the idea of psychical research and made it this fascinating topic that was absolutely engrossing for the public.
And he was really one of the absolute pioneers of stepping away from all the mind tricks that can be played and actually looking at what was really going on.
I think he was a genuine investigator who got caught up occasionally with characters who weren't quite as genuine as he was. And I think he did play around a bit. But a genuine investigator he was. And he did an awful lot of paranormal research.
Hello, Mr. Price.
Harry Price died at his desk in 1948, and so at last he knows the answer to the eternal question, is there life after death? I wonder, is he watching us now? His obituaries were mixed, but they were also plentiful, appearing in newspapers all around the world. Harry would have liked that. Oh, yeah. Good old Harry.
Tomorrow night at 9, Stargate SG-1's Amanda Tapping hosts Sky One's brand new show, Proof Positive, investigating the paranormal. Make sure it's in your Sky Plus planner. Back to tonight, though, and 24 is next.